Where do the Japanese people actually come from? It sounds like a simple question, but for more than a century, no one could fully agree on the answer. Are the Japanese the direct descendants of the ancient Jōmon people, some of the oldest known inhabitants of East Asia who lived on the islands for over 10,000 years? Or are they mainly the result of later migrations from the Asian mainland, waves of farmers and migrants who arrived from the Korean Peninsula and East Asia, reshaping the population of Japan forever? Historians have debated it, archaeologists have argued over it, and for a long time, even the people of Japan themselves carried different ideas about their own origins. But today, DNA research is finally beginning to reveal a clearer picture, and what it shows is not a simple origin story, but something far more layered, more ancient, and far more mysterious than expected. In this video, we are going to trace the genetic history of Japan step by step, from the earliest hunter-gatherers who lived in isolation on the Japanese archipelago after the Ice Age, through the arrival of rice farming migrants from the Asian mainland, the formation of early Japanese society, and all the way to what modern DNA science is revealing about one of the most genetically distinct populations in East Asia. And along the way, we'll uncover some of the most surprising discoveries in human genetics, including the deep ancestry of the Jōmon people, the genetic transformation brought by the Yayoi migration, the hidden dual structure of modern Japanese DNA, and why Japan's genetic story does not fit neatly into any simple category of origin. Japan today is home to over 120 million people, spread across 4 main islands: Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, and Shikoku, along with thousands of smaller islands stretching across a volcanic arc on the edge of the Pacific Ocean. For most outsiders, Japan often appears culturally and ethnically homogeneous. A single language, a shared national identity, and a long history of isolation have all contributed to this perception. But genetically, the story is more complex than it looks on the surface. Modern genetic studies show that the Japanese population is not the result of a single ancient lineage. Instead, it's a mixture of at least 2 major ancestral groups that came together at different times in prehistoric Japan. One group is the Jōmon hunter-gatherers who lived on the Japanese islands for thousands of years in relative isolation. The other group is the Yayoi people, who arrived later from the Asian mainland, bringing agriculture, new technologies, and a fundamentally different genetic profile. This mixture is one of the reasons Japan is so genetically interesting, because unlike many continental populations, Japan's genetic history unfolded on islands, and islands behave differently in human history. They preserve ancient lineages longer, they slow down migration, they create genetic pockets that can survive for thousands of years. To understand Japanese DNA, we need to go back to a time long before written history, before cities, before agriculture, when Japan was first being populated by humans after the Ice Age. Around 16,000 years ago, during the late Pleistocene period, sea levels were much lower than they are today. Japan was not fully isolated as an island chain in the way we see it now. Land bridges and shorter sea crossings made it possible for early humans to reach the archipelago from mainland Asia. These early settlers became what we now call the Jōmon people. The Jōmon culture is one of the longest continuous archaeological cultures in human history. It lasted for more than 10,000 years. These were hunter-gatherers who relied on fishing, hunting deer and boar, and collecting plants and nuts from the rich forests of ancient Japan. They're also known for some of the earliest pottery ever discovered in the world, decorated with intricate rope-like patterns that give the Jōmon culture its name. But what makes the Jōmon people especially fascinating is what ancient DNA is now revealing about them. Genetic studies show that the Jōmon population was deeply distinct from most other East Asian populations. They carried ancient genetic lineages that are not commonly found in mainland populations today. In some ways, they appear to be a relic of an older East Asian population structure that existed before large-scale migrations transformed the continent. And here is where the mystery begins to deepen, because when researchers compare Jōmon DNA with modern Japanese DNA, they find something unexpected. The Jōmon contribution is still present, but it is only one layer of the modern genetic structure. It does not dominate the genome. Instead, it exists alongside another major ancestry source that appears much recently in the historical timeline. That second source is the Yayoi people. Around 3,000 years ago, a major transformation began in the Japanese archipelago. New populations started arriving from the Korean peninsula and possibly parts of coastal China. These migrants brought rice agriculture, metal tools, and new forms of social organization that were very different from the Jōmon way of life. This period marks one of the most important turning points in Japanese history, because within a relatively short time, Japan shifted from a hunter-gatherer society to an agricultural one. Villages expanded, populations grew rapidly, and the genetic structure of the islands began to change. Ancient DNA studies suggest that the Yayoi migrants carried a genetic profile that is closely related to modern Northeast Asian populations today. As they mixed with the indigenous Jōmon people, a new population began to emerge, one that would eventually form the foundation of the Japanese people as we know them today. But the mixing was not uniform across the entire archipelago. Different regions of Japan show different levels of Jōmon and Yayoi ancestry even today. This means that the genetic story of Japan is not only about two ancient populations, but also about geography, migration patterns, and long-term isolation effects that varied across the islands. And this is where the real mystery of Japanese DNA begins to take shape. Because unlike many other regions of the world where migrations completely replaced earlier populations, Japan shows a pattern of deep continuity mixed with strong external influence. Ancient lineages were not fully erased. They were absorbed, preserved, and still visible in modern genetic data. This creates a unique genetic structure that scientists often describe as a dual ancestry system. But even that term feels too simple for what is actually a very complex historical process. So the question becomes, how exactly did these ancient populations interact? Why did the Jōmon survive genetically instead of being completely replaced? And what other hidden layers might still be present in Japanese DNA that we have not fully understood yet? To answer these questions, we need to go deeper into the genetic evidence, into regional differences across Japan, and into the surprising connections between Japan and other ancient populations across East Asia and beyond. And what we find next begins to challenge many long-held assumptions about isolation, migration, and identity in the Japanese archipelago, because the story is not finished yet. For a long time, Japan was often described as an island laboratory of human evolution, a place where populations developed in isolation, cut off from the constant migrations that shaped mainland Asia. But modern ancient DNA research is showing that this idea is only partly true. Japan was never completely isolated. It was connected, just not in the obvious way. Instead of continuous large migrations like those seen in continental Europe or Central Asia, Japan experienced pulses of movement, long gaps of isolation, interrupted by sudden waves of migration, each one leaving a lasting genetic imprint. And the most important of these pulses was the Yayoi expansion. The Yayoi migration didn't just bring new people, it brought a completely different way of life. Wet rice agriculture, metalworking, new settlement patterns, and more complex social hierarchies all arrived within this wave. But more importantly for genetics, it introduced a new ancestral component that would eventually become dominant in most of modern Japan. Ancient DNA comparisons show that Yayoi-related ancestry is closely linked to populations in Northeast Asia, particularly regions that are today part of Korea and coastal China. These groups themselves were not genetically uniform, meaning the Yayoi migration was likely not a single population movement, but a series of related waves over time. As these migrants settled across Japan, they expanded rapidly into fertile plains, especially in regions like Kyushu and western Honshu. These areas became early centers of agricultural development, while Jōmon-descended populations were gradually pushed into more isolated and mountainous regions, such as Hokkaido and parts of northern Honshu. But what is striking is that this was not a complete replacement. Unlike some population shifts in human history, where one group almost entirely disappears genetically, Japan preserved a measurable Jōmon contribution. Even today, genetic studies estimate that modern Japanese people carry a blend of both ancestries, though the proportions vary depending on region and individual lineage. In broad terms, most modern Japanese genomes are primarily Yayoi-derived, with a significant but smaller Jōmon component layered underneath. This creates what scientists sometimes call a two-layer genetic structure, but in reality, it is more like a gradient than a fixed division. And this gradient is still visible today. For example, populations in Hokkaido show a stronger Jōmon genetic signal, partly due to the presence of the Ainu people, who are considered one of the closest living descendants of the ancient Jōmon population. In contrast, populations in western Japan tend to show higher Yayoi ancestry, reflecting the historical entry points of agricultural migration. This regional variation is one of the key clues that helps reconstruct Japan's deep genetic past. But the story becomes even more interesting when we zoom out beyond Japan itself. Because the Jōmon people do not fit neatly into modern East Asian genetic categories. When researchers compare Jōmon DNA with other ancient populations, they find that the Jōmon represent a deeply divergent lineage within East Asia, one that separated from other East Asian populations tens of thousands of years ago. This has led scientists to suggest that the Jōmon may preserve genetic signatures from some of the earliest migrations into East Asia, possibly representing a population that once spread widely across parts of prehistoric Asia before later expansions reshaped the region.
In other words, the Jōmon are not just ancient Japanese. They may be part of a much older and more complex population structure that existed across prehistoric Asia before modern groups formed. And this is where the mystery deepens even further. Because if the Jōmon represent an ancient layer of East Asian ancestry, and the Yayoi represent a later agricultural wave, then modern Japanese DNA is essentially a living record of two major chapters in East Asian prehistory. But there may be more layers still hidden beneath these two. Recent studies in ancient genomics suggest that East Asia itself was shaped by multiple population movements over time, including early hunter-gatherer groups, northern Eurasian-related populations, and southern coastal migrations that moved along ancient shorelines long before written history. Japan, being an island chain, may have preserved traces of some of these older interactions in ways that mainland populations did not. This is why Japanese DNA is often described by researchers as structured but anciently diverse. It looks uniform on the surface, but underneath, it contains deep ancestral layers that stretch far back into prehistory. And then there is another important factor that shaped Japanese genetic identity over time: geographic isolation after the Yayoi expansion. As agriculture became dominant and populations grew, Japan entered a long period where internal development became more important than external migration. While there were still contacts with the Korean Peninsula and China, especially during historical periods like the Kofun and Yamato eras, these interactions were not large enough to completely reshape the genetic foundation that had already formed. Instead, Japan entered a phase of internal consolidation. This is where regional populations began to stabilize, and genetic differences between regions became more subtle but still detectable. Over time, social and political unification further blended these regional differences, creating the overall genetic profile we see in modern Japan. But even within this apparent homogeneity, ancient structure still remains. Modern genomic studies using high-resolution data can still detect traces of Jōmon ancestry in different individuals, sometimes even linking it to specific regional histories. These signals are faint but persistent, like echoes from a much older time still embedded in the genetic code of modern people. And this brings us to one of the most surprising conclusions of modern research. Japan is not genetically simple. It is not purely isolated, and it is not the result of a single migration or a single ancestral population. Instead, Japan represents one of the clearest examples in the world of layered population history preserved on islands, where ancient hunter-gatherers, agricultural migrants, and regional adaptations all merged over thousands of years into a single modern population. But even now, scientists are still uncovering new details. Every new ancient skeleton, every new DNA sample, and every improvement in sequencing technology adds another piece to the puzzle. And with each discovery, Japan's genetic story becomes not simpler, but more complex. And what emerges is not a mystery that is disappearing. It is a mystery that is becoming more detailed the more we learn about it. In the next section, we'll explore how Japan's genetic structure compares with neighboring populations, what it tells us about ancient East Asian migrations, and why Japan remains one of the most important regions in the world for understanding human history in Asia. Sure, let me extend that ending for you. And as we dive deeper into the story of Japan's genetic past, we begin to uncover not just the roots of a nation, but the very patterns of human migration that shaped East Asia itself. Japan's DNA is not just a historical relic, it's a living, evolving puzzle that continues to reveal more as science advances. Every new discovery is like turning a page in a deeply layered history book that we have only just begun to read. The mystery of where the Japanese truly come from is far from solved, and in fact, it's becoming even more intricate the more we learn about it. What we thought were clear answers about isolated populations, early migrations, and the dominance of particular genetic markers have been challenged and redefined in the face of modern DNA research. This is not just the story of a single wave of migrants, but of multiple peoples interacting, blending, and reshaping the genetic landscape over thousands of years. As we move forward, we will explore how the evolution of Japan's genetic makeup connects with broader patterns of migration and adaptation across the entire Asian continent. We will look at how these ancient genetic shifts influenced not just the physical traits of the Japanese people, but also their culture, identity, and even their modern-day connections to other East Asian populations. What's more, as the genetic study of ancient populations advances, we are likely to discover even more layers that have yet to be uncovered. The world of ancient DNA is still growing, and with every new study, we are learning that the story of Japan's genetic makeup is not richer, but more mysterious than we ever imagined. Stay with us as we continue to peel back the layers of history and explore how Japan's genetic tale intertwines with the larger migration patterns of East Asia. There's so much more to uncover, and the deeper we go, the more we realize just how complex and ultimately how interconnected our human story truly is. This mystery is far from over, and in the next section,
we'll take a closer look at how modern genetic research is transforming our understanding of Japan's ancient origins and what it means